Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we have another episode of Talking with Robot Framework Experts, and we are actually going to talk with the biggest expert of them all, the very creator of Robot Framework, Mr. Pekka Klärck. And the subjects of the day are the history of Robot Framework, the history of the community, and the most important delivery of the beginning of the year, which is the Robot Framework 5.0 version that was released a week ago. Pekka, welcome to the channel. Thank you for accepting my invitation.
Thanks a lot. Great to be here. I'm looking forward to the discussion here.
How are you? Everything good?
Yeah, it's good. Kind of was somewhat exhausted a while ago when we were trying to finish that big release, but now that it's out, it's kind of been more relaxing. So that's okay.
That's great. That's great. So, for people who maybe don't know who you are, which is hard to believe because you are the actual creator of Robot Framework, could you do a small introduction of yourself?
Sure. So yeah, my name is Pekka Klärck. I live in Finland, and I've been involved with testing and test automation since year 2000, so already kind of a long time ago. I started my career as kind of doing test as a test engineer, but I was involved with test automation very early on. So I started doing different kind of automation attempts and while learning to program while doing those and so on. So that's what I started with. Well, then at some point there, needed to do my master's thesis. I think we can get back to that a bit later, but then got ideas for robot framework, and that we've been working for that for something like over 15 years as well. So most of my career actually.
Yeah, that's great. So, how did the idea come up? You just sit at a table one day and you said, "Let's
No,
invent a framework."
absolutely not. So as I told, I was involved in automation very early on. I was doing something like sending emails automatically, writing Perl scripts, or in the beginning modifying Perl scripts others had written, and doing different kind of automation, different projects in different contexts. I noticed then that there's quite a lot of similarities, even though I was working like in healthcare, in antivirus stuff, and different kind of totally unrelated domains. I noticed that in automation there's a lot of kind of similarities, and when I needed to then try to get out of the school, so I was studying while studying in the University of Technology in Helsinki while working, and took while to get graduated, but I needed to do my master's thesis, and then this kind of automation frameworks felt like a good topic. So I studied them, basically read everything was written about them, learned more about keyword-driven frameworks. I had written some kind of keyword-driven frameworks already earlier, learned about data-driven frameworks, different kind of frameworks, and then did prototypes like for different kind of frameworks and like how they could be and what kind of common components there would be. So like my motivation for the thesis was that okay, there's clearly some kind of similarities, so we should be able to have kind of a common way of writing test data, for example. So perhaps there could be a kind of common parser component that could be used in different domains. And also noticed, okay, we always want to log something. So perhaps that could be a kind of a common logger or something like that. So the idea was to see what kind of common components we could have, so that when creating new automation frameworks, we didn't need to implement everything from scratch. But kind of major finding of the thesis was, which I finally then got written, and was that okay, we actually can have this kind of generic automation framework, not only kind of independent components that we can mix and match different ways, but we can have a common framework where the core is totally generic and totally independent from all the domains that you then extend with these libraries and so on. So that was actually kind of interesting thesis, because there was actually new kind of finding. I had thought I wasn't expecting something like that to come out from the thesis, but I think it wouldn't have been possible with literature study if I hadn't had this earlier experience from automation projects where I had actually hands-on implemented different kind of frameworks. nor would it have been possible without doing this literature study. So the study, thinking about this more and thinking about different alternatives, if I had just continued writing those kind of frameworks, that wouldn't have been made. So it was kind of a good match in that way. So I had enough hands-on experience and then needed to do this literature study, and with that knowledge was able to then come up with this concept.
Great. So the biggest impact of Robot Framework is that being a keyword-driven framework is easier to understand even by people who don't necessarily have knowledge about a certain programming language. And I'm one of them because in 2015, when I started automating with Robot Framework, I had almost zero knowledge of programming. Of course, I did things wrong, but that's how I learned. And in the end, it helped me a lot that it was a keyword-driven approach, and I wasn't forced to use any kind of programming language. So that's a very good job on that.
Yeah, and that was original motivation. There was that I wanted to be able to make automation so that different people can be involved with that, so that it. I knew when I was writing this, when I was coming up with, I was a test engineer myself, and I had some technical background, of course, as well. But I knew that a lot of test engineers who have a lot of domain knowledge. There are also people who are working in testing who are actually more like domain experts and testers, and they don't necessarily have that much technical skills. Whereas in automation, you always need to write code. Basically, it's always some kind of programming, and then programmers don't necessarily not have that domain knowledge. So I wanted to be able so that people who know the domain can concentrate on creating tests, also new tests based like very simple as possible syntax basically. Whereas then having the real code, the real thing that is actually communicating with the system on the test, so that it can be written using real programming language. So there's kind of difference there. So I didn't want to be driving actual systems with kind of a toy language. Like Robot Framework itself, of course, the syntax is a programming language. It was a programming language already in the beginning because you were constructing new things from keywords. It's even more now with Robot Framework 5 when we added these more new syntax features that we are going to talk at the end. But so it's kind of a programming language itself. So you are now, if you are using Robot Framework and using those new features, you are definitely a programmer. And that's kind of one thing I want to emphasize, that also it's kind of easy to get started, even if you don't have much programming skills, but then you can deepen your knowledge, and then you can go to the other side and start writing a bit of Python and writing your custom libraries and so on as well. But yeah, there are, as you were totally correct that was kind of one of the original motivations was to make it so that you can do automation even when you aren't a programmer, and it's also so that you can create new tests, not only that you can just take some existing and maybe adapt them. So that's the reason where keyword-driven frameworks are so good. With data-driven frameworks, if you have a kind of data like table where you have different kind of tests, you can easily add new test cases there, like that, just with different data, but you cannot create different kinds of new test cases. But with keyword-driven tests, with suitable set of keywords, you can construct new kinds of tests as well from the same kind of building blocks, a bit like building stuff from Lego blocks. When the thesis was kind of getting ready, I had the idea that this could be a good open source solution as well, so that if we would have the core as an open source component, then people could write kind of custom libraries, that we could grow up an ecosystem there. But I also realized that, okay, I don't have personal resources to start creating something. I noticed, okay, the prototype stuff worked, but it was like horrible code, and there was a lot of like shortcuts and so on. The logging was totally horrible because I knew that, okay, that's kind of generic thing that can be improved. I was more interested in the execution core, that I can make it to work somehow, and well, good, but it was, as I said, horrible. But then I got really lucky that around the same time I had those prototypes ready. The thesis was still waiting for me to have motivation to finish all the writing, but I had prototypes ready, I had the concepts ready, when an old colleague of mine from an earlier automation project contacted me, and he had joined Nokia Networks, and they needed automation solution in very kind of a heterogeneous environment, and was running on Linux and so on. So no kind of ready-made commercial automation solution was at all possible. And this was in 2005, I think. And around that time, most automation projects were kind of failures. They didn't very often have any kind of a return of investment, at least positive return of investment. Our automation project where we had been involved was somehow successful. The whole project got basically terminated at some point. So it didn't bring that much benefits in the long run, but it was actually looking pretty good. And so he knew I have some ideas and contacted me, okay, what do you think about this? And I said, well, actually, I've been studying this stuff quite a while, quite a lot since we talked last time, and I have these new concepts. And then I went there with my back then employer. We presented my concept and ideas, and they got interested in that. And we started then in 2005 project at Nokia Networks to implement a kind of a automation solution for this one project for their needs. So it was in source, in-house, not open source, and it was only for one project. But because I had the idea that I want the core to be generic, I wanted to be generic. So even though it was we were implementing automation solution for one project, I kept the core generic, and then we implemented some libraries for them. So when that project was somewhat successful there, again, that time most automation projects weren't that super successful. So there was some success there, it was working, and other projects nearby started to get interested. So it was possible for us to use the same core and extend it with other libraries, and then actually with projects in different business lines, totally doing different kind of domains and so on, because Nokia Networks is it was a big company. We're starting getting interested, and it also worked on different business lines, different domains. Like it was initially some kind of Java middleware component, but then it was kind of radio technology and Java Swing user interfaces, web user interfaces, and it was spreading to different kind of domains there. So it was like proving that, okay, this is actually useful and it works. Then I was starting to more and more thinking, okay, it would be great if this was open source, but I knew that we've already spent quite a lot of time making it, and I cannot, of course, just take that code and make it open source. So I needed to build it from scratch. Of course, if I would have built it from scratch, I would have known to do some things better, but still a lot of rework. But this colleague of mine, Petri Haapio, who had got me there initially, was then able to somehow, I don't know how, to talk with Nokia lawyers and got the permission to open source it. So that was like really many kind of really great coincidences that I had this experience before starting my thesis, that I was able to come up with those concepts. Then I got involved with Nokia. We worked there for 3 years, and then we still even got the permission to open source it. So it was open source in 2008. And then the actual community kind of around it, except for the internal community at Nokia, started to emerge. And even there we actually got very lucky, because it was out like few weeks, maybe a month, when the first library that was built from someone else than our team was actually created. There was Martin Taylor, who is still, I think, part of the community, and he may be already retired, but he was working for Texas Instruments back then, and they were needing a automation framework to replace their old in-house framework that was. They noticed, okay, it's not possible to maintain this anymore. We need to do something. We need to implement this again. Instead of starting from scratch, he was first searching that is there something available. And he was able to find us. We've been out literally like weeks since it was published. He was able to find us, and I hey, this actually makes sense. And he had written some kind of a library for testing Windows user interface using AutoIT for their old Python-based framework. And it was easy for him to adapt it to Robot framework. And then he released, and we were totally amazed. And okay, there's actually somebody, not from Nokia, not even from Finland, but from US, is actually releasing something. And it was kind of an awesome start for us. And
nice.
Slowly, then we've been getting more and more libraries. So now there's a huge ecosystem created by our awesome big community with different kind of libraries, different kind of tools, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really, really good.
So if we talk about the, let's say, version history, do you remember what were the most important features that came up with each big release?
Yeah, I could actually show you. I did a talk in RoboCon, this our annual conference that we are, by the way, organizing again in May now. We organized that first time in 2018. I did there a kind of talk about kind of history. I just found out that search for those slides yesterday, and so I have examples. I could show. This is actually example from the early prototypes. These are from my thesis. So here you can see how those test cases there look like. And in the thesis, the data format was basically open office spreadsheet. So it was not plain text or even HTML that we used later, but it was these spreadsheet files. They were quite commonly used for this kind of automation solution. It was relatively easy to parse that stuff from different columns and so on. So here we can see that there's a test case. There's 3 test cases here, like in the test case name there is in the first column. Then there was a separate column for documentation that turned out to be useless in the long run, but the idea was that we'll have a kind of a column for that. And then the important thing, interesting thing is then that column C and D. So column C basically has keywords like that we are calling those input and equals, and those are keywords. And then they have arguments in subsequent columns. So that basic idea of how you construct test cases from keywords and their arguments existed already back in those prototypes. And even the concept of user keywords, which is one of the very kind of a big features in robot framework, is the idea that you can construct keywords, your own keywords from lower level keywords in libraries existed in those prototypes. So you were able to create user keywords like this. There's again like keywords is keyword name that you are creating is in the first column, and then there's yet again a separate column for documentation. But then keywords C and D contain the implementation. There's the first one there, arguments, is a special kind of keywords. It defines arguments. Now, robot framework user keyword syntax has those square brackets around it to separate it better. But we can see that we were able already back then in those with the prototypes to be able to create new kind of keywords from these earlier ones.
Okay.
So as you can see, the kind of basic stuff, the basic concept were already there. There was also a library API that has actually changed quite a lot. So this library API looks nowadays different. Now this library implements 3 keywords: launch, send, and activate. But they were back then you needed to add that handler postfix there, and also you didn't directly get arguments that your keyword was called. You instead got some kind of a keyword object where you needed to get the key argument yourself. So that API has changed a lot to much better from the prototype. But the basic idea with how this was already there. But now I can go forward, and here's an example from. So those were just prototypes. So this is actually robot framework already from Nokia days, but this is not open source. This was never open source. This is kind of the earliest version that worked then. Data format had been changed from this spreadsheet format to HTML because HTML works better in version control system than spreadsheet, and plain text that we nowadays use, of course, works even better. But this is already getting quite much closer to how robot framework nowadays looks like. So Of course, if you look at settings, there's stuff that's not supported anymore. Like we don't have these log files and report files there. They are only command line options. But library import is exactly looks the same. Variable section looks the same. And most importantly, that test case looks exactly the same, except for document settings nowadays documentation. But otherwise, I mean, this would be even valid if converted to plain text format.
I must admit, I never used documentation on keywords or test cases.
Yeah, actually, that's not bad at all, because my thinking nowadays is that if you have clear enough test case or clear enough documentation, and I mean you have named everything well, your suite is named well. Suite possibly can have a documentation explain it a bit more thoroughly. If you have named your keyword well, test case names, everything well, you don't typically need documentation, and that's kind of the reason why in the prototype, the idea that you have a separate column for documentation didn't really work out. Now you can add it if you need it, for example, here this documentation is totally useless because you can understand it without it just fine, but they're mainly for the kind of demonstration purposes.
Okay.
And I think back then the library API was already mostly the same as it's now. I mean the basic stuff in libraries, how keywords work and so on. So this is already very old. This is most likely from some like 2005, 2006. And it's already kind of similar. So the basic stuff has been very much the same, but what has been changing is, for example, log files. So this is the log file from then, and as you can see, it's not very good. There's no expanding or anything. So stuff like this has been improving, and that's kind of the idea that there is that when the core is generic, we can improve things that are totally generic everywhere, like logs and so on. So we've been able to do that. So that's of course much better now.
Yeah, I agree.
And then with the new parser that was introduced later, then for example, then we've been able to add this programmatic feature. So if you think about bigger features, I guess, so this is early. May not be even 1.0 release. The first release that was open source was release 2.0, and it looked somewhat similar to this one. It was back then the data was only in HTML. It was something like 2.1, quite soon after the open source version, when we added support for plain text format in the first place. And then later in 3.2, I think, we dropped the support for the HTML format altogether. So there's been this kind of evolving with the data syntax also. So it was initially in the prototypes of spreadsheet, and then it was HTML, and now it's plain text.
I think I started working with Robot Framework at about 2.9.
Yeah.
So a long time ago.
Yeah, it's long time ago. Back then, I think already back then, the plain text format was the one that was used much more widely.
Yeah.
But HTML was supported. We dropped it then in 3.2, which was a really kind of big release with a lot of groundwork for the future, because that 3.2 release then contained new parser that was parsing the data in much better ways than the earlier versions were, which made it possible to extend it further. So we were able to add then in 4.0 this if-else structures, and now in 5.0 we added much more like while loops and try excepts and so on.
Is the 3.2 the version when you switched from having names in txt to names .robot for scripts and resources?
I think that support got there already earlier, but 3.2 probably made it so that you actually needed to have effort to not use robot extension. I don't remember exactly anymore when we added the support for robot extension, but it must have been already in 2.0 series, or it could have been 3.0 as well. I don't know, but it's been there for a long time. But for quite a long time, it was possible you could use both the TXT extension and the robot extension without any kind of configuration. But then I think with 3.2 we made it so that it's only robot unless you explicitly tell from the command line that you want to also support some other extensions. The problem with the TXT extension was that we weren't able, when parsing those files, we didn't know that are they files for robot framework. So if there was a syntax error of some kind, or if it was encoding that we didn't detect, we didn't know was that the fatal error was it the problem that there's data that we cannot parse that's kind of bad, or is this just a random text file that we should ignore? So that's why we added this robot extension, that when parsing, we know that this is stuff that we should be able to parse, and if we cannot, we can kind of freely report it. And also, of course, it makes it easier for editors to see that, okay, this is not a random text file, this is a robot framework data.
Nice.
But yeah, so there's been kind of constant evolving there mostly. Like the basic concept already in these early days, for 1.0 release, it's kind of still kind of the similar concept, but we've been adding then to new syntax stuff, of course, lately, but even before that, then these logs they've been changing a lot. And of course, as we talked earlier, the kind of the biggest thing has been that the community and the ecosystem around the framework have been getting better.
Yeah, that's one of the most important parts of the robot framework development, I think, and the
Yeah,
way it looks today. Because without the community, we would not have success.
exactly. Yeah, I mean the core is important, of course. Without that, nothing would work. But then the core alone, of course, totally isn't useful for anything. The exact core doesn't have. I mean, the robot framework core cannot be able to kind of test anything because you always need to have those libraries to work with anything. And of course, the standard installation contains some libraries with it, but they are that useful for, for, for different kind of automation needs. So you need to most often have some kind of a ready-made or custom library.
And even though the community of Robot Framework is pretty big, um, I still feel that Robot Framework isn't getting the attention it deserves. I know a lot of people who are struggling to start an automation project and they haven't heard about Robot Framework, so they are struggling to find frameworks that are not suited for them because they don't know any programming language. So they start automation and programming in the same time, and that's not going very well. And they discover Robot Framework by accident or by asking people around, and they get amazed by how easy it is to start with this. So how can we increase the visibility over the community to make it a more widely spread, if you
Mm.
like, solution? Are there any plans for this?
Yeah, well, I'm personally been kind of happy with the growth being relatively, I mean, not being skyrocketing that much because I'm not a marketer. I'm an engineer, and I don't have that much interest in marketing. And I know that it's useful, and I know people are using it. That's been enough for me, and well, being paid, being paid is enough. We can, um, but we of course done something. We try to create some kind of getting started materials and so on. That's kind of a problem that has been kind of my problem also, and also kind of our kind of problem with the kind of the people involved with the core is that we haven't created perhaps that good getting started material that it would be very easy for people to get started if you don't have any experience. But part of the problem there is that because Robot Framework is so versatile, you can use it in different contexts, in different domains, in different ways. It's kind of hard to make something, okay, use it always this way, because that's not true. You don't need to always use it the same way. You can always adapt it. But yeah, that's something that we are working with. We have a foundation here, which I think we can talk a bit soon. And for the foundation, Robot Framework Foundation, it's important that we, of course, spread the knowledge and make the community bigger. So we have some ideas there, but on individual level, I think the best way for market Robot Framework is kind of this kind of that you tell to your colleagues and so on. People learn from it. I think it's called is it word of mouth marketing, or what's that like? This kind of grassroots thing, because that's the most effective one. I mean, if we would have some kind of ads somewhere, ads are always like, oh, they're lying, because ads are always lying. But if your colleague tells that this actually worked for us, then that's much stronger. And
Yeah.
that's, I guess, that's how it got actually so big in Finland very early on. So Robot Framework was used at Nokia, and people are, of course, changing jobs. At some point at Nokia, they were letting actually quite a lot of people go around, I don't know, 2010 or something. And people were finding new jobs, and they had used Robot Framework in their earlier jobs. So they joined new places and got it into use. And so it spread from Nokia to other places in Finland very, very fast. And so in Finland, it's been used very, very widely since, I don't know, 2010 or something like already that. But then, of course, getting to other places when you don't have people there who don't know it initially, it's slower. But then when there's enough people who know about it, then the ball gets rolling. And I'm not really worried that in the end it wouldn't get more popular. But of course, that definitely helps. So what you are doing with this channel, for example, is awesome. Of course, that kind of, there's different ways. Different people like, some people like videos, some people like something else, different ways of learning. So I think that's really good that there are initiatives like this that for different kind of people. But I think the best way basically is that you tell about, I mean, not you, but the audience. Yeah, you tell about your colleagues. You go to your local kind of testing meetup or automation meetup or agile meetup or whatever meetup, if it's kind of relevant, of course, and tell about that okay, this is how it works, and this is how we've used it. You maybe write a blog post or something like this. So all this stuff helps a lot when people hear from actual users. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't do better and we shouldn't do better. But there's, as I said, for me personally, I'm much more interested in coding and evolving the framework, evolving the language, think about those problems than in marketing. I actually don't mind writing documentation that much. It's very slow and kind of painful to write good documentation, but I value it's very important. So I like doing that as well. But then there's the problem that I don't have unlimited amount of time as well.
Yeah, it's a good thing that the community is growing, and I see the robot framework board is growing, and there are people who are coming with new and fresh ideas. For example, we are going now through a phase of rewriting the robot framework documentation.
Yeah.
Manny is in charge of that. So it's good that we have this kind of people who are willing to sacrifice their time to teach others and to offer value any way they can.
Yeah, and I hope that most people can do it somehow as their work time, so that it's not, you hopefully shouldn't do much of this as kind of a hobby. Of course, you can do it as a hobby as well, and that's okay. But if you need to be involved more, I hope that you are somehow being able to do that on a company. And there's a lot of value in that, for companies letting people to spend at least some time helping open source in different ways. But yeah, there are these initiatives now to improve the documentation, the overall documentation as well. So I think what we could actually talk a bit here is the foundation, since that's kind of one of the things it's doing. And to talk about the foundation, we could go back, talk a bit about robot framework history again. So we already got earlier to this point that okay, the development then got started at Nokia and was open source in 2008. But even though it was open source at Nokia in 2008, Nokia was still paying for development. So we had a team that was like most of the time like 4 people that was helping teams at Nokia to use robot framework. And a lot of that helping was to implement new features. We got there and they were, okay, we want to do this. How can we do it? Well, at the moment you can't, but let us implement the feature and you can. So that's how a lot of the features got implemented in the framework. Then that okay, we noticed okay, users are needing something, and we were thinking about generic ways to implement what they need in the core. So we were working for Nokia. We were all actually external people there. At some point, then we were all externals. There was kind of management decision that okay, we need to get rid of all the externals. And in the end, in 2015, our team was totally kind of dismantled. We actually last like 2 years or something. We were only 2 people anymore, so we were very small. But then at the end of 2015, the direct Nokia sponsorship like that ended. But the good thing was that Ismo Aro, who had also worked for Nokia, but had joined other companies, then had came up with this idea that we should have this kind of a foundation or association to be there behind the framework, because there was already a risk that at some point Nokia is most likely going to end this, because managers are making decisions, and there were a lot of managers who wanted us to stay, but then if bigger management does decisions like okay, get rid of all the externals, then there's nothing you can do in the long run. So Ismo got this idea about this foundation, and the Robot Framework Foundation, which is technically an association in Finland, was founded in 2000. I think that was actually 2015 as well, or 2014, I don't remember anymore, by Finnish consulting companies who were using Robot Framework in their own project. And we're kind of worried that if Nokia sponsorship ends, then there's this automation framework that they are heavily using in their project, promoting, that's not anymore necessarily maintained. So they wanted to make sure that, okay, there's maintenance even if Nokia sponsorship ends. So the Robot Framework Foundation was founded, and it had existed like a year or something when the Nokia sponsorship really ended. So then the foundation started to pay for me and other developers for developing the framework further. So the Robot Framework itself, it's kind of big undertaking. So it wouldn't be possible for me to have it as a side job that I would be working have a day job and then with the family and everything would in the evenings develop Robot Framework. That wouldn't work. It wouldn't be very I've been working with a long time enough that it wouldn't any be more kind of very motivational for me either. But yeah, the good thing is that we had the foundation. Initially, the foundation was very small, didn't have much money. So the first 1 year or 1.5 years with the foundation, it was only able to pay for enough to create bug fix releases. Like Robot Framework 3.0 was still released with Nokia sponsored, and that was the first release supporting Python 3. So with the foundation, we created 3.01, 3.02 kind of bug fix releases, but then it was starting to get a bit bigger, and then we were able to get 3.1 as well. And we got more members, and we started organizing RoboCon conference that also gave us kind of some profits, and that then we being able to work on. Foundation still doesn't have enough money to pay me full time, so it's not a full time job for me to develop Robot Framework, but it's kind of been over half time last year, so it's been okay. But that's very kind of that's without the foundation we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have Robot Framework 5.0, for example, without the foundation, and we wouldn't have many other things. There are kind of a browser library, for example, also which is relatively new, was somehow initial backing was the ideas, and some sponsored money was via foundation and so on. And now the foundation also, there's a board, and the board is also which is great. We now have more and more people outside Finland, so we've been with the foundation trying to also be international. Our chairman of the board is also is from Germany, René Rohner, so that's also really good. It's getting more international, and the foundation then has these ideas. It's not only the core that the foundation wants to make sure that thrives. They want to make the community bigger. They want to make the ecosystem bigger, and the foundation is nowadays also sponsoring ecosystem projects. So we studied that last year, which is awesome. So some of the money is spent for other than the core, and now there's also these ideas on how to make documentation better, how to improve the overall documentation.
Okay, so you talked about the community, the Robot Framework board, and you said that they helped a lot with developing Robot Framework 5.0, which is the biggest release of the year. So it's been a week since it has been released. I know there were some delays, but we are finally here. So what can you tell me about this release?
Yeah, it's a really big new release. We started developing it last autumn. It's kind of we lately have two really big releases, 5.0 and then 4.0 a year earlier, which are both made possible by this earlier work that we were talking about. This like a new parser that was done in 3.2. That is much better, so it's easier to add now new features there. So 4.0 added if-else structures, which was first kind of a programming feature in Robot Framework since the for loop that was in there already from the very beginning. And well, not in the exact first version, but the for loop syntax in Robot Framework existed for a long time. Everything else, like if structures and handling exceptions, were done using keywords. Like we had this run keyword if that takes an expression and then another keyword. For loops you couldn't really do like that, so we came up with this separate for loop syntax ages ago. But then we realized that we want to have other programmatic features in the language itself, not done as keywords, and then we also realized that the old parser was horrible and needed to be redone to be able to do that. So we added if-else structures in 4.0, and then a lot of new stuff in 5.0. We actually had a community survey last autumn asking what features people want to have, and syntax features related to new syntax like try except, especially like handling exceptions and while loops and continue and break and stuff like this got most votes. And there were others also got quite many votes, but we decided to make this 5.0 as a new feature that where we add a lot of these programmatic features there, so
So
that
basically,
we
you are
concentrate
closer
on
to
that.
Python with these
Pardon?
features. You are closer to Python language with these exact features.
Yeah, well, it makes Robot Framework even more kind of a programming language like. You can use now in Robot Framework itself not only for loops and if structures that you were able to use earlier, but also exception handling and while loops. And then also handling loops is now better because we actually have a break and continue statements, not keywords for that like we had earlier. And returning from keywords also, there's a return statement for that. So it's more like programming. Still, the idea absolutely is not to replace Python as a general purpose programming language. This is totally different domain, but the idea is that you can, if you need, you can construct more things there. The primary use case for this is RPA domain. In test automation, I would say that most of the time this kind of more complicated logic should be in libraries where it's easier to handle. There's a better programming language there. But in RPA, it's often important you want to actually have visible in your data that what you are doing and how you are handling exceptions, and also that it's in the log file shown that, okay, we did this, and then that how kind of all the conditional logic goes and what's executed and so on. So that's kind of, it's more important there. But it definitely has use cases in test automation as well. But I hope there's kind of always a risk that when we add more programmatic features to the language, is that people start using them too much, because oftentimes it's easier and better idea to do this in Python. If you need to run a loop like 100,000 times, if you do that in Robot Framework, you get the huge log file, for example. If you do it in Python, it's much more efficient. So if you are confident using these new features, try excepts and while loops, then it's actually you are programming already, and then just learning Python syntax is not very complicated anymore. You can start doing things there. But
So
yeah, so I still think these are really good features. We use Robot Framework, of course, to test Robot Framework itself, and these new features, especially this exception handling, has come up very handy there.
it's interesting that the idea of the big 5.0 release came from the community. So that shows once again the importance of the community and the fact that everyone gets a vote.
Yeah, yeah. Well, basically, it's still so that I kind of have the final vote on this. So it's not like we have a vote for community and then we do it like that, because then often if one people is voting something and the other one is something else, there might be a there might be a conflict. So
Absolutely.
they need to decide how to do it. But also then we want to have kind of idea that what people want, what people find most important. And of course, we also, because the foundation is paying for me, then of course they have more say there. So we also was listening to what they have to say, but we also want to hear the community. So it's kind of both. I want to hear all kind of different opinions on what's important. Then of course, when starting to implement them, also there's kind of on lower level design decision, want to hear opinions. But then I'm mostly making those calls anyway. Then how it will actually work after listening what people have to say. But yeah, we had the survey, and this just where could be that RPA people were more active answering the survey, but that's fine. And I also thought it was, especially this try except was very important. Then what we just decided, we basically implement everything that we can think of as useful programming features, so that we have them all done. And now we are going to concentrate on other things in the future.
So what are future implementations? Maybe Robot Framework 6.
We don't know much about Robot Framework 6. that development will start earliest next autumn. What Robot Framework 6 will depend on how the next RoboCon goes, for example. So RoboCon conference is now organized. We have a hybrid event, so we all have an on-site event here in Helsinki, but it's also available online, and it's in May. And due to COVID and so on, we aren't yet sure how well it will go, how many people we get. The ticket sales has been actually relatively okay lately, but still kind of we don't know. We have got latest years we've got quite a lot of income from the conference, so it's very, very important that we get, and with that money we've been able to pay me and others. So for Robot Framework 5 we had Janne Härkönen, who has been involved with Robot Framework already at Nokia times, even before open source, so he knows the code base very well as well. So he was also working at that. So we were two basically working with it. So it's not only me who is paid, but it's, as I said earlier, it's too big to be something that people would do only as a hobby, at least so that we would get anything done in kind of a timely manner, because then if it's a hobby, there are other priorities there. But yeah, if RoboCon goes well, so kind of please go buy tickets and please join. It's going to be a great conference also. So it's been awesome all years it's been organized. So if it goes well, then hopefully we can start Robot Framework 6 in the autumn. Its content is open. We just know that it's going to be a bit bigger. I'd really like to have inline keyword call syntax there. So one of the limitations in Robot Framework syntax is that if you are calling keyword with arguments, but arguments cannot directly be return values from other keywords. You need to always return that return value to a variable and so on. So it would be very nice to have a kind of a inline keyword call syntax, but it's a kind of unclear how the syntax should look like, and also implementing it will be very complicated. So it's going to be a big task. But that would be awesome fitting in Robot Framework 6 if we come up with the syntax. I don't know, but it's
those of you who are interested in the robot framework development and are interested in supporting the community, I will leave you a link in the description with the RoboCon event, and you can find there all the details and buy tickets and so on.
Yeah, RoboCon conference is really great conference. I mean, there's a lot of value in participating. Tickets aren't overly expensive. Especially when most of the time it's your employer who is paying them. If you need to buy it yourself, then contact the team. There's an email address somewhere, and you'll get a discount. But yeah, so it's been a great conference, and you don't need to participate because it will benefit us, and we can pay for development. But that's a good thing to keep in mind as well, so that all the profit that goes, it doesn't go directly to someone's pockets. We hope to make profits from the conference, but then the profit goes to foundation, and then foundation is paying me and others for their work. So for me actually to get to work, I'm also to some extent involving RoboCon organization. So I need to work there to get money to foundation, and then I need to work to get paid for that robot framework work. So it's kind of a work, but anyway. But yeah, if you want to support robot frameworks, the actual development, there are many ways. There's participating in the conference is very good way, because as I said, all the profits go for robot framework development, or maybe like enhancing documentation and stuff like that. Whatever the board or people working in the core in the foundation decide is most important at that time. Then also, of course, becoming a member of the Robot Framework Foundation is very good. We get then some kind of a more steady kind of income from membership fees, which aren't very expensive. So membership fees for the Robot Framework Foundation are way less than typical kind of a yearly license fees for any kind of commercial automation solution, even for like one person. So it's not, for any kind of company, it's not a big deal to pay that. And that really helps us. If you get like 2,000 euros, it's already like 2 weeks work or something like that. Well, not necessarily that much, but anyway, it's still, it really helps all the money that we get. And
also, for those who are watching and don't know this, there is a Slack channel for the robot framework community. I will also leave a link in the description. And on that Slack channel, you can find members from the Robot Framework Foundation. You can find Pekka himself, and there are a lot of channels with the topics that are meant to help people who are trying to create automation projects, who have questions, and it's a very big and active community. I encourage you to go there and be a part of the big community.
Yeah, the community is really awesome, and you don't need to be a member of the founders or anything to be participating in the community. And to help Robot Framework, of course, I mean, paying something is not the only way, of course. I mean, you can, if you join the community, are active there, maybe you help with features, you can provide pull requests, you can implement your own project, all that stuff helps a lot. So, and also, just as we talked, spreading the word is very important.
Yes.
But yeah, so we kind of got sidetracked about with the new features. So 6.0 is coming hopefully next year. Content is totally open yet. We don't even know what kind of budget we have for that or when we'll start it. But what we do know of, this is not 100% certain, but it's quite certain, is that we most likely are going to start with Robot Framework 5.1 very soon. We still need to have a kind of a final budget decision from the Robot Framework Foundation board, but I think it looks pretty promising that we would continue to start with that. And it's going to be a very small release. The idea, well, not that small, but smallish release compared at least to 5.0, with the plan to have it released before the summertime here in Finland or something, I don't know, in May or perhaps or latest in June. And the main target for that release is most likely, it's going to be, it's not even most likely, it's going to be localization. So we want to make Robot Framework easier to be used in non-English kind of contexts. So what we plan to do is that we want to make it possible that the markers in test data, like those test cases, headers, and setting names, and so on, that you could localize them. You could say that, okay, language is now German, for example, and then German names would be accepted in headers. And also, so all the markers in data, like all the headers, or like a documentation or test setup and so on, they could be localized. And also then prefixes that you use with this given when then syntax that are now hard coded to be owned, like all in those English versions. So that's what we want to do. We have a lot of, like, Robot Framework has been growing a lot in Central Europe lately, especially in Germany and in neighboring countries. And there, in many contexts, it would be beneficial to be able to have all this in kind of in your local language. Of course, you can already now have your test case names and your user keyword names and arguments and so on. They can be any language, and all characters works. It's not ASCII only, but there are these certain markers that must be exactly how they are using English names. So we want to be able to change that. Then maybe later, well, possibly even in 5.0, but most likely later we can then start localizing log files and reports, and then much later, because it's much bigger task, then error messages and so on should also be. But it's getting the whole thing localized. It's a huge task, so we don't aim to do it. Okay, let's do one release and do it all. But the most important thing is to have these headers, markers in data, so that you could localize them, and then also those given when then prefixes.
Is that a request that also came from the community, or?
Yeah, it's coming basically. I can tell that the German members in our foundation board have made it pretty clear that in Germany it would be beneficial, especially in government projects and so on, to be able to use German words there. And we don't have anyone from France, for example, in the board, but my understanding is that in France it's even more important that they would be able to use that. And it's many other places. In Finland, we are so used that Finnish is so small language that we don't expect to have programming, this kind of stuff in Finnish. But of course, even in here, I would assume that in some really government project, it would be helpful, even here. But here, everybody who is in IT speaks English and understand English. Well, not everybody, but I mean, so big percentage that we don't really need to care about that. But in some other places, when talking with like a big bosses and so on, they would be much happier if it would be in their local language. And that's something that's part of idea is that we want to get bigger in around the world, and our kind of when we still are too highly and kind of centered in Finland. Well, from here it's easy to start now, especially we have two members in the board from Germany. That's kind of a natural direction for us to go there and see how we can do it. We may have kind of start to have some kind of a smaller conferences there as well, and this is kind of the step to direction. And of course, I mean, although that's kind of the target for us is Germany and places around there, we are not making it like English and German only. We are making it so that you can we'll make it totally customizable so that it can be localized for any language. And then when we have any ideas how it will work, then we'll of course ask from the community that if you can provide these good markers for your language, then we'll bundle them with Robot Framework so that Robot Framework itself would support the languages that community members provide. I cannot write. I can write Finnish markers, but nothing else. Maybe Swedish. Well, no, I speak Swedish to some extent, but I think it would be better that someone who is actually native Swedish speaker would do that.
Yeah, that would be really important
yeah,
to get it right.
But then if it goes to languages like Chinese or Thai and or whatever, I mean, no way I would try to do anything. So somebody from the community needs to come up, and maybe we need to have then kind of two opinions, because if they are part of the Robot Framework core, then they get kind of standard, and then if it's somebody's opinion that in our language is it right like this, then others they might disagree. But somehow we want to, of course, then incorporate it with Robot, and we can add these languages also in the future. And we also want to make it possible that you can from the command line say, okay, use this is not supported out of the box, but use these markers from here or something like this. So that's what we are planning to do. But of course, it's going to be whatever bug fixes and other smallest features. But that's what I and Janne, who is hopefully also continuing with this 5.1, we are going to concentrate on that. But then anything else more is pretty much something that if people are providing pull requests, then we'll be reviewing them. So that's actually a big portion of my work paid by the foundation, is that when people are providing pull requests, and okay, let's add this feature that I'll review to kind of, is that idea good in the first place, but then also the actual implementation and merge them. And that's been actually really good. If the latest release, we got a lot of pull requests. There was a lot of contribution by the community. So that ratio has been also growing, which is really, really good.
Nice. So we know we have a past for Robot Framework. We have a present, and it is nice to hear that we also have a future. So I invite people who want to join the community to do it. I'm part of the community for I think 2 years now, and it's been nothing but helpful. That's how I got to know Pekka and other members from the community. So if you want to get help or involve in developing Robot Framework, don't hesitate to contact the community.
Yeah, definitely. I guess we are running out of time here, so we don't have time to go too much into details about the new features in 5.0 like we were kind of initially planning to do, but I think maybe you can add a link to the release notes, for example. So Robot Framework 5.0 release notes actually are not only listing features, but they're also explaining a lot of these features, how they work with examples, so you can go check them out. So it's most about the new syntax, but there's also some new things related to creating libraries, which is very, very helpful as well. But you can find more information there.
We can do a feature video on the topic if we get a lot of interest.
Yeah, that we definitely can do it. So if there's interest for me to basically show these Robot Framework 5.0 features live, we can definitely do that as well. That's something that I'm going to do. I'm going to have a talk at the forthcoming RoboCon. I'm going to show some of that stuff there, but it's not going to be that long talk, so I don't have that much time to go everything through in detail. But we can definitely do it. So if you are interested, leave a comment somewhere, and we can make a special episode about all Robot Framework 5.0 new features, or maybe like new syntax features, like this programmatic features in general. I don't know.
Yeah, if
We can
you
do it.
want to see another video of, especially for Robot Framework 5 features, you can leave a link in the description, and we will. You leave a comment, sorry,
Mm.
and we will try to make it happen for you.
Yeah, we can do it. But I think this was a good discussion. There's quite a lot of topics if you want to talk about like the history and then what and about the new stuff, especially when we have a lot of new stuff, and then also a bit about the future.
Thank
But
you,
yeah,
Pekka. This was a very interesting meeting. I hope that we earned some new members today. Um, so don't forget to check out the links in the description and post your ideas, and maybe we can come up with other videos. Also, if you want to see other people from the Robot Framework community here on the channel, you can do it. You can leave a comment and ask for somebody.
mm,
So thank you very much, Pekka. It was a very nice talk. Hope to see you again,
yeah,
and good luck
hopefully,
with the new projects you have uh,
yeah,
in place.
yeah. Thanks a lot, and thanks for everybody who watched this far. Uh, hopefully, got new members, and hopefully, people who see this are more eager to join the kind of other channels. I think the Slack is at the moment our most active channel.
Yeah.
That's a good place to us. But we have also community forums, and of course you can organize local events and whatnot. And if you organize something locally and it's possible for me to present remotely, then I'm more than happy to do that as well. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be here, and thanks for everybody for listening and watching.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Yes, bye bye.